Hey guys, so it's going to be a lecture video on notes number 4 of the industrialization unit. So I'm going to go ahead and start it by opening up notes number 4. All right, so notes number 4 is business and labor. So here we're going to talk about some of the strategies that were used by these rich industrialists to make a huge amount of money, and of course also what happened with labor, meaning workers. So section 1, business strategies. A couple of them that are really important to discuss is vertical integration and horizontal integration. So vertical integration is the process by which a company buys up all the supplies, materials, and services it needs in order to make a product cheaper. Now, what this means is basically you're going to take a lot of money that you already have and invest it into your company. So vertical integration, the idea is this. So we're going to use this picture to kind of explain this. So the idea is that again, it's a process, series of steps used to buy the raw materials, the services, equipment, everything you need to make a product. So let's say you're making steel, like Andrew Carnegie made steel. He's going to use vertical integration like this. So in order to get steel, you need iron, so you're going to have to buy iron. So you're going to spend money. You're going to have to take that iron from the iron mines and send it to your company. So that's going to be cost you to ship it. Then factory that makes the machines, you're gonna have to buy machines, so you're gonna spend money there. Um, Steel mills is where they process the iron to be ready to make into steel, so you're gonna pay them to do that. And then finally, it's gonna come to your steel plant or your steel factory where you're gonna make it. You gotta pay your employees, and then of course after you sell it, you gotta ship it to the person. So all of these are things that you end up paying to make steel. And in regular business, not vertical integration yet, regular business, once you pay for all of this, it costs you $70 to make a steel beam. And you know, the steel beams are the ones you make the buildings with. And you sell it for 100, which means for every single steel beam you sell, you make a $30 profit. What that means is when you sell beam after beam throughout the whole year, it makes you a rich man. Now, this is where somebody who would want to become even richer will use vertical integration by taking a lot of money they made when they make $30 profit and investing it back in by buying all these things. And I'm going to switch over to the next image. They'll go over that. Now, what does that mean? It means that now you're going to spend a whole bunch of money to buy the iron mines. So you spend a lot of money to iron mines. You spend a lot of money to buy trains, railroads, and ships. So you invest a lot of money back into the company, but you buy this. Then you buy the factory that makes the machine. So anytime your machines get fixed, that need to be fixed, or you need new machines, you already own it, so you don't have to pay for that again. You buy the steel mills. So now when they process the iron, you don't have to pay for it either because you own the steel mills. You already own the steel plant or factory. You still have to pay the workers. That doesn't change. And then you buy more railroads to be able to ship it across the country. So what that means is with vertical integration, you buy all these things. Now, what does that mean? That means you spend a lot of money, invest a lot of money. But now that you have bought all of this, next time you make a steel beam, your cost for this is going to be a lot less, which is going to be about $40 per steel beam. So instead of regular business is 70, now that you've bought a lot of this stuff, now you're going to pay $40 for a steel beam and you still sell it for 100. So what does that mean? Now you're making $60 profit because you never have to buy these things anymore because you invested so much of your money already into it. So you don't have to buy the iron. You own the iron mine. You don't have to pay for transportation. You own that. You don't have to pay for machines. You own the factory that makes them, and so on and so on. So now you just doubled your profits to $60 a steel beam. And it's going to take you a little while to get your money back for all the money that you invested in buying all these things, but eventually you will. And from that point forward, 100% profit will be $60 to steel beam, twice as much as you used to when you were rich. So what does that mean? It means you're really rich now. Now, the next process, the next one is horizontal integration. If we go back to the notes, it says that you process in which you buy the companies out of it, process in which companies would buy up all its competitors. Basically, either you buy your competition or you eliminate your competition. And how is it you eliminate your competition? Is by, as we looked at this, lowering your prices so your competition can't afford it. So your competition, who's regular business, they still make their steel beams at 70. They still sell it at 100. So they're making money at $30 a profit each. But you don't lower your prices to 70 or 80. You lower it to 60. And then remember, it costs you $40 to make. So you're making $20 profit per steel beam. So you're making some profits. But the important part is you lower it to 60. Your competitors can lower it to 60. It costs them 70 to make it. So what does that mean for your competitor? That means for your competitor, they're going to go out of business. And once they go out of business, then you have every right, because nobody there to compete with you, to raise the prices back up. Now back up to 100 where it was before? No. Now you raise it to 160. Now why are you raising it all the way to 160? Answer is because you can. Who's going to compete with you? So now you raise it to 160, you're making them at 40 because of vertical integration. Now your profits are at 120, which means the ones that you had at 60 with vertical integration, you doubled again. This is how you become one of the richest persons alive. Now, vertical integration, horizontal integration, both strategies are illegal now. You're not allowed to do this because it really screws over competition. And as people, we love competition. We want businesses to compete over our business. We want them to give our deals, lower prices, make products better. But if there is no competition, like they don't have to fight over your business. They don't have to do any of that. So they'll give you a cheap product and make it super expensive, and they never improve it. So we love competitions. Businesses hate competitions, and vertical and horizontal integration is the way they did to get rid of it. And if we go back to the notes, is their goal was to create a monopoly where they own total control of one industry or one product, meaning there was no competition for that particular thing. So if I had a monopoly on cars, I would be the only one who makes cars. So do I have to make the car better? No. Do I have to make it bigger? No. Do I have to make it gas mileage be better? No. Do I have to put better electronics? No. Why? Because there's no competition. So if I own total control of an industry, that's called monopoly. Now, a trust is when one or more come together to own it. So let's say there's another company who also has a kind of a monopoly on cars, and I have kind of monopoly on cars, and we're going back and forth competing with each other, lowering prices, making the cars better. So you buy from me or you buy from them. At a certain point, me and the owner of the other company realize, why are we competing? Why are we fighting each other? Why don't we just come together? So we'll take my company and their company and we put it together and we make one large corporation. Now we both own this corporation, but and that's called a trust. So when you take two companies, put them together, and you make one large corporation, that means it's a trust. A trust means that you once again eliminate competition because there's nobody else but our corporation, and we could lower raise the prices and never improve our products. And these things, both monopoly and trust, are both illegal today. But in the 1800s, when this happened, they were able to do it. Now, captains of industry, these are people who took advantage of these strategies and these laws, and they made themselves a huge amount of money. Andrew Carnegie, he made a steel industry, a monopoly, and he used vertical integration and horizontal integration, and he paid his workers very, very cheaply, and he will, at one point in his life, will be the richest person alive. John D. Rockefeller did exactly the same thing, but not with steel, with oil. Same thing, vertical integration, horizontal integration, paid his employees very low wages, and one of the richest people alive at one point in their lives too. William Vanderbilt did his monopoly on railroads, so he started making a huge amount of money with railroads because he would eliminate the competition or buy off the other railroads, and if you wanted to ship something, it was going to be on his um, it was going to be on his railroads, and he's going to charge you what he wants. J.P. Morgan, created one of the biggest companies in history by when he bought U.S. Steel from Andrew Carnegie and Carnegie Steel, and he turned it into U.S. Steel, and that was the biggest company in the world. And he, at one point, was the richest people alive. So these people took advantage. These captains of industries took advantage of the opportunities because they were legal still and made themselves very, 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 very rich. Well, people realize that all this stuff that's going on is only hurting them. That rich people are getting richer and poor people are getting poorer, and the government, who should be stepping in to make laws to make sure that these people don't do these horrible things, that they're not doing it. So there's going to be, again, another push. And we talked about in note number 3, the Interstate Commerce Act, where the Grangers were so upset with the railroads that they started organizing and they were going to vote Grangers only into the members of the House of Representatives and Senators. Well, it didn't work. The Granger movement didn't work. But what it did do was to scare the crap out of politicians that if they don't give people something, that people are going to continue to be angry, and eventually they could overthrow the government by voting for different political parties. So they gave them the Interstate Commerce Act, which said they are going to supervise the railroads, and they're going to make them do what they're supposed to do. And that's true. That's what it said. But they also purposely wrote the law in a way that if the railroads didn't follow the directions of government, of the Congress, then nothing would happen to them. So when the railroads were told, you can't do this, you can't do that, you got to do it this way, and then they ignored them, the federal government just basically said, well, we tried and it didn't work with them. which meant the railroads continued to do whatever they wanted, even though there was a law that said that the government was not going to be checking up on them. And what I told you guys then, that it was a very much a similar situation like this, that the government the government made it look like the law, the Interstate Commerce Act was a law like this that had teeth, that had some bite to it. They were finally going to get the railroads to do something, but in reality, the way they wrote it, and again, they did it on purpose, it was much more like this: no teeth, no anger, and the railroads continued to do what they wanted. Well, in notes number 4 now, we're going to talk about the Sherman Antitrust Act, which was exactly the same situation. People were tired of these big corporations forming trusts and therefore eliminating competition. So they began to put pressure on the government, and eventually they got something: the Sherman Antitrust Act. From this point forward, trusts are illegal. Great. Trusts are now illegal. No more of that limiting competition. So again, another law that looked like this. Yes, we finally got a law that had some teeth in it. They're going to make trusts illegal. But once again, it's going to be a law that looks like this, that doesn't get anything done, and it's not scary. Why? Because once again, they purposely did not clear up exactly what a trust was. So it was mostly ineffective because it didn't tell you what a trust was. So how do you get rid of a trust when the law that says they're illegal doesn't tell you what a trust is? And again, not by accident. So once again, another law that they made to calm people down, but in reality didn't do much. Social Darwinism. Now, what about these rich people? Don't they have hearts? Don't they see these children working in their factories and dying, and people dying all the time? Don't they like when they go to sleep at night? Don't they feel like, damn, how much money can I make and still like pay my workers almost nothing? Well, the reason why they didn't have that is because they had an excuse of why it was okay. And that idea and that excuse was social Darwinism. It's the idea, that a theory that success and failure of businesses is governed by natural law. It's basically taken from Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection, survival of the fittest. Now, you guys have covered this in your science class where you talked about survival of the fittest in the animal kingdom. And you talked about the king of the animal kingdom being the lion. Now, if you discuss this, the lion doesn't have any rules of why it's on top. It just does what it needs to do to get on top. There's no timetables where it says you can't eat at this time, you can't hunt this animal. Basically, the lion is the strongest and it's on top because it does what it needs to do. These business leaders said, well, that same idea applies to business. The strongest businesses will survive and be on top, and the weaker ones will die out. So, what do you got to do to make sure that you're on top if you're a strong business? Just like the lion, whatever you want. And if you have to crush people, put people out of business, that's not your fault. And this is where a popular phrase comes into play. It's not personal, it's just business. So if I put you out of business, don't take it personal. It's not like me attacking you individually, just the way we do business. And yeah, it's a really easy way of doing it because you get away with doing really crappy things and putting a lot of people out of business, but the same idea applies. I need to do what I need to do to be on top. And if that means you're the weaker business and you're on the bottom, well, that sucks for you. Don't hate the player, hate the game. I'm just really good at business. It sucks that you suck at business and that your business is at the bottom. And it basically let these business leaders do really shitty things because that meant that whatever they did to get to the top was okay because it's just business, not personal, just business. And they believed in this idea that the government should not get involved in business, called laissez-faire, that let business handle business. Why? Because then they could do whatever they wanted. And it justified the following: poverty, that there should be poor people because there's going to be people on top and people on the bottom. It's just they happen to be on top. Success of big businesses, that I should be able to grow my business as big as I want, bigger than I need it to be. And if I have to crush you in order to get there, well, sucks for you. And the power of millionaire industrialists, that because I'm rich and powerful, I should also have an influence in the government and what laws they pass. So basically, social Darwinism let them off the hook for all the horrible things that they did. And because it's natural law, what they basically preach was, well, this is the situation that God created. Business was created like this by God. So if God didn't want me to be successful like this, if God didn't want me to put you out of business, then he wouldn't let me. So I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing because God's okay with it. And it wasn't like the clouds were going to part and God was going to come down and say, I never told you that. Of course he wasn't. So what it meant was that business leaders got to do what they wanted. Now the question is this true? Is social Darwinism an excuse for all the horrible things that they did? Now, later on in their lives, they're going to start thinking about this. Hopefully, you understand what I mean by this. Like, your choices in life decide whether you take the escalator down or you take the escalator up. And obviously, up is to heaven and down is to, not the nicest place. So these rich leaders who practice social Darwinism, who screwed people over, later on they're going to have to question, was social Darwinism real? Or is it something we created just to make ourselves feel better and do whatever the hell we want? So for workers, what they realized is that these business owners weren't going to wake up one day and just say, what a beautiful day. You know, the birds are chirping, it's a sunny day. You know what? I'm going to give my workers a raise. That was never going to happen. So eventually, workers realized if they are not going to give us these raises, if they are not going to improve the dangerous conditions at work, then we have to. And the only way you do it is by coming together. So this is when unions are going to form because workers work long hours, very dangerous working conditions. In 1882, an average of 675 workers were killed every week. That basically means 100 people every day went to work across the country and didn't come home because they died at work. 100. That's a huge number every single day. And why? Because nobody cared. Business leaders didn't want to improve the conditions because it would cost them money. And the government was so involved in helping business grow that they let them get away with everything. So workers realized if the government's not going to do it, if the business leaders are going to do it, we got it. So early unions came together to fight for basic things like higher wages, safer working conditions, and this idea of collective bargaining or bargaining collectively. Now, what does that mean? What that means basically is that like, if we are gonna strike, if we're gonna we're gonna negotiate with an owner, you can't have all workers on one side arguing with the owner back and forth. You need a representative. So, like, if a worker went up to their boss to try to get them to say argue for better working conditions, the first thing that would happen is you're fired. We don't want you here. We only want positive workers. If another individual worker went up and says, "Hey, we need to get a raise so I don't have to send my child to work," you're fired. Get out of here. All right. If you don't like this job, I'll find somebody else who does. So as individuals, they had no power. Only collectively together would they do that. And the way you do it is you come together and you elect somebody to be your representative. And that person represents you when they go negotiate with the boss. So that representative who represents the whole union, when they go ask for a raise, if the boss fires them, they're not just firing them because they represent everybody, they're firing everybody. So now the owner has to think twice. If I fire this person, I fire everybody. Who's going to work the machines? And I'm not making money. Now they will negotiate. Even though it's one person, they represent everybody, and that's collective bargaining. Some of the early unions were American Federation of Labor. It was only for skilled workers and only for men. The Knights of Labor, there were another one who met secretly in the beginning because they were so scared that the owners would find out and fire them before they got together. But they allowed everybody. They allowed women, African American, immigrants, unskilled workers, basically anybody who could work could be in the Knights of Labor. The American Federation of Labor was mostly skilled workers who knew how to do machine work and mostly men. Strikes turn violent. So what happens if when you're negotiating with the owner, they say, no, I am not going to give you a raise. I am not going to fix the machines or whatever it was. Your power as a union is to strike, that you protest by not working. You go outside and you have strikes like this. Simple strikes like this, where you're outside and you have these signs and you talk about what you're fighting for, like this. Organized labor is marching. We want rights, whatever it was. Well, sometimes though, it got violent. Violent like this because the owners of the factories, they didn't want to give in. So they wanted to figure out what can we do to make sure that these protesters don't work. And one of the things that they did is hire something called strike breakers, or otherwise known as a nasty name like scabs. So strike breakers and scabs. These are people who came to work in a factory when there was a protest outside, a strike outside, when it was being conducted. So you are striking, not working, and therefore not earning any money. And you're hoping that because the machines are empty inside that factory, that the owner is going to listen to you. And you're marching all day, you're hungry, you're not eating anything, you're not making any money, but you're hoping the owner is going to have to give in because his machines are empty and he's not making any money. And here comes these people who walk into the factory and they start working on your machines. How do you feel about those people? And the way people felt about them is they hated them. And they often started riots because these strikebreakers try to come in. They're like, we're not going to let you go in the factory so you can start working on the machines because then you're taking our power away from us. So people hated scabs. There's going to be a lot of examples of strikes that are going to get violent because, like example, the Homestead strikes. This is with Carnegie and steelworkers. he's going to hire somebody called Pinkertons, which is like private security, and they're going to come in and they're going to basically smack all the protesters into getting out of the way so they could bring in the strikebreakers like this. So they came in with weapons and they made them move out of the way, and now the strikebreakers could go into the factories and actually start working. Well, the next day, when the protesters, the strikers were outside and ready, they came with their weapons. And they were going to let the Pinkertons just push them around and let the strikebreakers in. So they led to violent strikes like the Homestead strike, where people got hurt. And people started getting a little crazy with these riots where there was so much anger on both sides. In this particular case of the Homestead strike, four are going to get killed outside. And oftentimes children were there as well because the whole family went to protest. So, I'm sorry. So strikes are going to be common during this time. People are going to push back and sometimes they're going to turn violent. The Haymarket Affair is a situation that happened where oftentimes when these strikes happen, the owners of the businesses would um, call the police. And these rich business owners were smart. They would often donate money to the police for them to get new uniforms or for them to get new equipment. And then when they had a strike outside their factory, they would call the police and basically tell them, hey, you remember how I donated money for you guys? Well, I need you guys to move these strikers out of the way. Now, here come the police, the actual police, not like security, police, and they tell you to move out of the way. And when you don't, they basically beat the crap out of you because they're the police. They can get away with it. And this happened a lot where the police were basically being used by the factory owners to get what they wanted. So in Chicago, 3,000 people are going to gather in the Haymarket Square. This is not a protest. I mean, this is not a strike. This is just a protest against the police, basically saying you should not be able to do what you want to do. And as these 3,000 people were there protesting the police, guess who's up? Who shows up? Of course, the police. And there's some of those 3,000 people who are very angry, and they took something with them called Molotov cocktails. And what Molotov cocktails are is basically a container full of gasoline with a rag stuffed into it. And then they light the rag on fire and they throw it. And when the glass container breaks and all the gasoline goes in every direction, because it's lit on fire, it creates like a firebomb. And they threw that at police. The police who have weapons. So what did the police do? They started shooting into the crowd. 3,000 people who were in this crowd, including children. So this is supposed to be one of the explosions on the police, and this led to a violent situation at the Haymarket Fair in Chicago. But it was an example that was happening across the country, where these police were often being used by factory owners, and people got tired of it. In this particular case, they got violent once again. Um, Results of all this striking, the high market affair, public began to turn against the union a little bit in the beginning. They started feeling that you guys are just troublemakers and you guys are starting all these violent situations. But two different presidents back to each other, President Hayes and President Cleveland, both started to support the use of strikes and the unions. And it's going to lead to a lot of improvements by the unions, a lot of wins by the unions. So the business owners thought, how can we get around these victories by the unions? And their answer was, well, what if workers don't join unions in the first place? And they created these yellow dog contracts. It's a work contract says that an employee would never join a union if they want to get a job. So basically, you want to work here? No problem. Sign this yellow dog contract saying you never join a union. How could a union be powerful if it doesn't exist in the first place? So this is their way of going around that. Now, usually American workers said, hell no, I'm not going to sign these yellow dog contracts. They would go try to get a job somewhere else. But immigrants did sign a lot of these yellow dog contracts because their attitude is that they were lucky enough to get a job and that they shouldn't complain. And they signed the yellow dog contracts. The scabs that I talked about, the strike breakers that people hated, they were also oftentimes immigrants. So there's going to be a lot of negative immigrant feelings because of them being scabs or them signing these yellow dog contracts. But overall, despite some defeats, the labor unions continue to grow and improve the conditions of workers. Women get involved. Many women started to organize themselves into unions as well. They were looking for better working conditions, same as men. Equal pay for equal work, meaning that why would they get half the pay as men? They need to get paid at least, as we talked about, those 10 cents. But they were also had a different agenda, and their last one was they wanted to end child labor. So their protest, like oftentimes, was on child labor, and they're also going to have some victories. And eventually, child labor will go away. Now, there is also going to be some really negative things that happen, and one of them is the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. 146 different workers are going to die either from the fire or from jumping to their deaths from the building. And this is the building itself right here. Oh, so this, I'm sorry, I should have used showed you this. This is a yellow dog contract. And see the yellow dog contracts, they would put the ads on saying you're gonna sign this yellow dog contract and it's gonna be a loyalty basically. That you're showing loyalty to your company by signing this contract. And what they were basically doing is basic you're not joining a union. But back to the Triangle Shirtwaist factory. So this is a triangle the building where it happened, and they were in the eighth floor, I believe, of that building. And this is what the inside looked like, super tight and very crowded, and a fire will start. Now, because of the corruption, because of the owners being greedy and not wanting to fix the problems of the factory, the women are going to be stuck inside. Now, there was a big emergency door, heavy emergency door that had broken, and it was supposed to be fixed, but the owner wouldn't fix it because that would cost them money. The the owner also had a rule, and the rule was that he didn't want anybody to steal from him, including women who would hide maybe clothes under their dresses. So he locked the door with chains. Like once the workers were in, the door was locked with chains and a lock. And a woman at the end of your shift would be checking under your clothes to make sure you're not stealing anything. And what happened is the manager who has the key went outside the factory, locked the door so they would stay in and they couldn't leave, and then the fire started and they couldn't get out. There was an elevator, but when the elevator opened, it was full of people from the other floors and they couldn't get out. So mostly they were trapped. So a lot of them are going to die in that floor and a lot of them are going to jump to their deaths. So people were outside and they were just looking at this happening. And yes, the fire department was there and they did the best they could, but it's not like our fire department today. 146, or this one says 154, are going to die. And all along the sides of the streets, their bodies were laid out like this. And people would come to see if their family member was one who died. And this was a big story because there was so many who died. And it could have been easily fixed if they had just fixed the damn emergency door or not chained the door. But because there was so much greed and corruption, nobody cared about the workers. And this is one of those examples where it could get really bad. The public was outraged and they started to support unions even more. That women should also be in unions and they need to be protected as well. And more safety conditions are going to be added to buildings like fire escapes, those big metal things that are added to the sides of a building where you could go out the window and go down the stairs. That didn't go in until after an example like this of how bad it could get. All right. Hope you understood what happened. Have a good day. Thank you.